Donald Trump spent last week on the defensive, and he partly caved over his border policy. Tonight, he is clearly eager to turn the corner. So let me tell you exactly what's happening. Your president is advocating a blatantly unconstitutional proposal to literally gut due process inside the United States. Now, from a legal perspective, the good news tonight is due process, not a choice for politicians. This is not Donald Trump's call. It's a right secured in the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution, of course, and it's upheld by judges, an independent branch of the United States government. So Trump has raised a new topic that actually underscores the limits on his own power and maybe the limits on his knowledge, because it's one thing to say you want to get tougher on the border, and another to propose things that are so unconstitutional that basically everyone knows, including your allies in Congress, you can't do the thing you're talking about.
They said, we'd like to hire 5,000 more judges. 5,000. You ever hear of a thing like that? Judges. We want a system where when people come in illegally, they have to go out. And a nice, simple system that works. You know, they want to hire now 5,000 more judges so that a person puts the toe on the land and we have to go to trial. This is crazy what we're doing. I don't want judges. I want Border Patrol. I want ICE.
The president doesn't want judges. That sound you hear is the sound of no one caring. Nobody. Because under our Constitution, presidents do not pick the other branches of government. So tonight I can tell you, as a legal matter, no one cares if Donald Trump wants or doesn't want judges. Now, if you put aside the actual rhetoric coming from the White House and even try to consider a more technical version of this argument, because people are going to be talking about it, you can say, okay, do people trying to immigrate to the United States get the same due process as Americans, even if that's not the president's call to make? Is there too much due process for migrants? And the short answer tonight is no. The part of the government that does make this call, the courts, has ruled many times that even when the U.S. does deny entry to humans or deports them from the border, which the U.S. can choose to do, they are still entitled to human rights. The Supreme Court upheld that in the 1800s and in 1953 and as recently as 1982. So keep those legal facts in mind when you watch the White House spokesperson today struggle to defend Trump's legal fictions.
It makes no sense that an illegal alien sets one foot on American soil and then they would go through a 3 to 5 year judicial process to be removed from the country. Thousands of illegal aliens are removed every month without seeing an immigration judge. Just because you don't see a judge doesn't mean you aren't receiving due process.
That's the scene in Washington, and while it may be comforting that Trump cannot eliminate due process any more than he could implement the original travel ban after the courts blocked it, the administration's focus on this sideshow occurs instead of more pressing duties, like reuniting the families split under Trump's now partially discontinued policy. Updates on that tonight. Well, parents are being told that they can see their kids again if they agree immediately to deportation. One parent saying they signed that paperwork out of desperation to see his 6-year-old child, but adding the truth is, I can't go back to Honduras. I need help. Another deported father has only been able to talk to his 6-year-old daughter, who's trapped somewhere in the U.S.
Ya te van a ir a traer, mi amor.
¿Cuándo?
Es que andan arreglando el avión, mi amor. No te preocupes, mi amor, si ya te vamos a ir a traer, ¿oíste? Maybelline. Te amo, mi amor.
I'm joined now by criminal defense attorney and a former prosecutor, Ambrosio Rodriguez, and NBC's Jacob Soboroff, who, as you know, has been reporting this immigration crisis in Texas and has covered the border for us at MSNBC for quite some time. I start with you as an attorney. Your view of Donald Trump saying things that underscore his own irrelevance, because he doesn't decide how many judges there are, and how this operates against the backdrop of all the pressing work that there is to be done.
Right. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous for him to take this point of view. I really don't think he knows what due process is and how it works. The fact
So you
that,
think this comes more from ignorance than anything else?
Right. I mean, not just ignorance, but everything we've seen from this president, which is ignorance on top of racism, on top of race baiting, and using these poor people who, I mean, we're talking about a very small group of immigrants that are coming from 3 specific countries that have been war-torn. I mean, I have clients from this part of the world, and what they have to deal with is truly awful. So I think what the president has done is made a statement that has all of us talking about what the rights should be for the people involved, and there's no getting around the fact that under our Constitution, once you step into the country, there's certain rights and a certain due process that they have.
You were speaking here to a Border Patrol chief in the Rio Grande. Let's look at that, Jacob.
Are you trying to deter people from coming by separating children and their parents and prosecuting 100% of people who come here?
Yes, if we do not do anything, we are going to be in a crisis mode.
So separating parents and kids is to put consequences on them coming here together?
Yes, yes.
So, I mean, if Donald Trump cared about the rights of people, he wouldn't have put a policy into place designed to tear families apart and rip apart the asylum rights of tens of thousands of people that come to the United States on a regular basis. This whole thing was done without any care in mind for the rights of people, whether it is due process or asylum. You're the attorney, I'm not the attorney, but I saw what it looks like on the ground when you don't care about the rights of people. It looks like children sitting in cages by themselves, ripped apart from their parents. And their parents, at this point, may be as many as the parents of all 2,053 kids that are left in the custody of HHS could be deported. And for all we know, according to a DHS official, may never see their kids or their parents again.
Right, and that's the human side of this and why there's such outrage still going around the nation. You mentioned being an attorney. I mean, this is a crash course in a kind of law school for the nation, but not the good kind, because everyone's sitting around their dining room table talking about how this works. And it is understandable that some people feel, given the problems we have in this country, given the poverty, given everything that we owe our own citizens, the question does come up, well, what do we owe other people? And yet, this is a constitutional democracy that has due process. I want to play, again, Sarah Huckabee Sanders on the judges thing. It is good to have judges overseeing this process because it ensures that it is fair. And a lot of people do get deported. We know that. The notion that the president and his people in the White House are spending today talking about, well, maybe we don't want judges, is chilling, even though they don't have the power. Take a listen.
Who's proposed to add 5,000 judges? I've seen 750 as a max.
There have been a number of different proposals, quite a few that we've seen. We've laid out what we would like to see, and hopefully Congress will work with us to make that happen.
Walk us through how this is supposed to work when you have judges involved in the asylum and border process.
Thank you. Look, first of all, I want the viewers to know that we're talking about immigration judges, not federal district judges. And asylum judges or immigration judges are employees of the Department of Justice, so which Trump is in charge of. If he hired the number of judges or lawyers necessary, the Department of Justice makes them immigration lawyers. This is an administrative process. This isn't a long trial. An immigration hearing.
Right. You're making it. Let's be clear. So you're making a subtle distinction here, which is the Constitution says people have rights, and that includes non-citizens in the same way that they have a right to be free from torture. They have a right to due process. You're pointing out that the way this is executed through American law is that you have these immigration judges that are set aside to do that, which is different and in many ways shorter and leaner than what Americans think of as a full trial for an American citizen.
Correct, because immigration is a privilege, not a right. Therefore, the same kind of rights that you have in a criminal trial don't apply in an immigration hearing, which is an administrative hearing, which, by the way, the person seeking asylum has all of the burden. Right. They have to prove their case.
And based on what you just said, do you think Donald Trump knows what you're talking about or not?
I think this president has proved beyond a reasonable doubt that he doesn't understand how our government works.
Both of you stay with me. What I want to do is turn to a very important guest here in California. There are 10 state attorneys general who are now suing Trump over the family separation policy. California Attorney General Xavier Becerra is helping lead this suit, claiming Trump's policy is both inhumane and draconian. Thank you for joining me at a busy time as you work on this case. First question out of the gate. Even if someone agrees with you about the criticism of the policy, what do you say to the more narrow argument that, well, Trump partly backed down last week? Why do you need to sue?
Because his executive action area was incomplete, it was incomprehensible, and therefore probably doesn't work right. We have no sense of what will happen to these children, where they will go, how long it will last. And so, like many of the things that this administration has done, they don't really think through them in a logical way. And so we're filing suit to defend the constitutional rights of these families and certainly of these children. No child should be put in a child internment camp.
You are suing the Trump administration, but you've also been out in the front here against Attorney General Sessions, your counterpart at the federal level, and he's blasted back at you. Take a look.
So California absolutely appears to me is using every power it has, powers it doesn't have, to frustrate federal law enforcement. So you can be sure I'm going to use every power I have to stop that.
As you understand, he is alleging that California, as a legal process, which you lead, are somehow out in excess of your state authority, and that he's going to push back. Your response, sir?
We're going to do what we need to do in California. We believe in upholding the law, including federal law and the Constitution, and that's exactly what we're doing. I think AG Sessions had at least one part right, and that is that we're using every power we have under the law. And we will defend ourselves where we need to, and we'll file action to protect our people where we must. So far, we've had a whole lot more victories than we've seen any kind of defeat in going up against the Trump administration, and that's principally because I think the courts are showing us that no one, including the occupant in the Oval Office, is above the law.
You say no one's above the law. This goes to a very interesting point, which you understand, and I think viewers have gathered. The immigration power is second probably only to the war-making power for an area where the chief executive gets wide latitude traditionally in the courts, as you know. And yet, in the travel ban and now on sanctuary cities and then border separation policy, we've seen this president, even with that wide latitude, appear to go beyond it. What does it tell you? What do you think is the significance of the fact that this president, Donald Trump, seems to get into so much trouble when he goes and tries to do things on immigration? And do you think that's a product, as we were discussing before you joined us, of ignorance or of some actual malign intent?
I think it's a cavalier way of trying to make policy and execute the laws, and they are running into the Constitution. We don't have the right in California to issue immigration laws, and we respect the federal government's right to enforce immigration laws, but we have a right to enforce the federal Constitution when the federal government and the Trump administration try to execute laws in a way that violate people's constitutional rights. That's why we've been able to have victories against them on any number of issues, whether it was the DACA Dreamers, where we stopped the Trump administration from canceling the DACA program, or in the victories we've had so far in protecting our state's right to determine how we use our law enforcement authority and not allow the federal government to believe they can commandeer us into doing what they want by holding hostage our federal funds that we should get here in the state of California.
And final question, sir. When the president says that maybe we should do this without judges, is that unconstitutional in your view?
It's also immoral. It's also wrong-headed, but it's also against the law and a violation of due process. So on any number of grounds, what Donald Trump is saying is not going to happen, at least not so long as our institutions stand up to this type of cavalier, rogue activity of the occupant of the White House.
I guess I should also close by apologizing, because I know you to be a seasoned litigator. So it's somewhat embarrassing that as part of my job as a journalist, I have to ask you whether the Fifth Amendment exists or not. You know, I guess that's where we are. Attorney General Becerra, thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. I turn back to the panel. Your response to what the Attorney General says there and what he's doing, these state AGs stepping up to try to actually put a line in the sand so that if Donald Trump decided again tomorrow to change his executive order, because he can go back and forth, that they would try to get a ruling here locking this in.
Well, first of all, I want to thank Attorney General Becerra. As a lawyer, he's doing a great job in just kind of defending our rights and kind of standing up to this administration. I also want to say I think it's very important There is no immigration crisis. This has been completely created by Trump in order to gin up his base. Right. If we look at the numbers, that is the people trying to come across the country without documentation, or the 2,000, 3,000 people that have been stopped in what this crisis has been going on for the last 2 weeks, this has been created in order to gin up his base. And what we're dealing with now is that we have an administration that's using the least of these. These are people who are escaping civil wars, gangs, and really horrible conditions.
Right, you're speaking about the asylum context and the overall data, but it is also true that the United States has a long border and there is undocumented immigration, right? I mean, that's whether we call that a crisis, I guess, is a question, but there is an undocumented immigration challenge for law enforcement here.
There is, and there always will be in the United States, as long as employers don't have to verify or don't have a system where they are held responsible for hiring people that don't have documentation. I mean, that's really the one thing that both Republicans and Democrats have in common when it comes to immigration. They don't hold the corporations accountable, only the poor people that come to work.
You're talking about the dual-party system's entrenched hypocrisy vis-a-vis corporate America. I am familiar with that thing they have in common. Jacob, I want to widen the lens because you've been doing so much reporting on this. Let's step back. We talked the law. We talked the lawsuits. What have you seen out there over these past months on a story that started, I think, in one place where Republicans said this is a winner for them, to the past several weeks where it does seem there's to be a sea change?
Well, what I think is that America is starting to understand the difference between the perception of what happens on the border in Washington, D.C. And the reality of what happens on the border. The reality is, you are absolutely correct. There is no crisis on the border. Undocumented immigration, apprehensions along the southern border are as low, I think, as they have been since the 1970s. It's an unbelievable thing to hear the president talk about violence coming across the southern border, drugs flowing across the southern border, and use that as a justification for ripping apart families and putting children in prison cells. When the AG, Attorney General Becerra, said, as a journalist, it's fascinating to hear him talk about these lawsuits. We don't know where these kids are going to go next. I want to see where these lawsuits go, because from the state of California, from the ACLU, I don't know at this point. We know kids aren't going in cages anymore, but we don't know where families are going. Are they going to be indefinitely detained at this point by ICE? Do they have to let these families out and go after 20 days?
Well, and you're putting your finger on such an important part of this, which is many of the parents, particularly those who signed the detention orders we were just reporting on for deportation, have little to no standing to get their kids back.
That's exactly right.
We've seen senators held at the doorway of these institutions. You and other journalists have been trying to report it out. If these cases go forward, the one we're reporting on tonight, that creates an additional leverage point and standing to keep an eye on this and to see about the humanitarian part of it. Briefly before we go.
I was just going to say, it could change the game, as they say. I mean, it really could change what ultimately happens with these people. And as we know right now, 2,053 young kids are sitting in detention tonight in HHS custody. The questions before were, where are the girls, where are the toddlers? Those questions still apply. But the next question is, where's everybody going next? And we don't know the answer tonight.
Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.